This is Your Superior Self, episode 52, Escape from Cubicle Nation.
The thing that keeps us stuck is we're afraid of losing our identity, right? We're afraid of losing our community. We're afraid of living in a van down by the river because we're financially devastated. And those are good things to be worried about. Nobody wants you to be, right? Like in a situation where you feel totally alone and exiled from those you love. But it's going to be a little bit dangerous if you're trying to do these things we've talked about this whole podcast, to grow, to expand, to open your mind to new possibilities, if you're always running in those same circles.
What is going on, Superior Nation? I am Trey Downs, and this is Your Superior Self podcast. I am a blue-collar worker turned into blue-collar entrepreneur, and each week I will interview inspiring influencers who will help you become your superior self. Thank you for joining me today, and let's get after it. And the book that I'll be focusing on this week is called Tools of Titans, written by Tim Ferriss. It is a collection of interviews that he's done over the course of his career, and in this interview he focuses on Bryan Callen, who is a comedian, and you would probably best know him from the show Mad TV. And in the interview, Tim asks Bryan, what would you say in a college commencement speech? And Bryan says, well, I would say that if you're searching for status and if you're doing things because there's an audience for it, you're probably barking up the wrong tree. I would say listen to yourself, follow your bliss. There is great security in insecurity. We are wired and programmed to do what's safe and what's sensible. I don't think that's the way to go. I think you do things because they are just things you have to do, or because it's a calling, or because you're idealistic enough to think that you can make a difference in the world. I think you should try to slay dragons. I don't care how big the opponent is. We read about and admire people who do big things that were basically considered to be impossible. That's what makes the world a better place to live. Wow, I really love that response. I love that answer because he basically talks to me. Like, I feel like he's directly talking to me when he says that if you're doing things because there's an audience, and that's probably not the best way to go about things, or the part where he says there is security in insecurity. And the reason why I take something out of that is because I tend to keep myself out of the podcast. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you hear me talking, but I don't really put a lot of my personal touch on the subjects. I don't necessarily put personal events or personal examples of what I'm talking about. And I need to do more of that. I need to find security in insecurity. I need to be more transparent in examples of how to get better at something. What do I personally do to motivate myself? And it helps people. I feel like if you go and you watch Facebook or you watch Instagram, you'll see a lot of people talking about the same things. It seems like everybody's reading the same book of marketing strategies. They're reading the same books on motivational speaking, and they're all basically, their messages are basically the same style of message. It feels like a lot of fluff, and I don't want to be like that. I want to be like transparent with you, the audience. I want to develop a relationship with you. Like, it really intrigues me and motivates me to hear someone's story and the particular event, what happened in their life to create this 180 change. And find out what motivates them and what really was the event that created the success for them. And I love hearing it. I write notes constantly when I'm interviewing people. I'm constantly going back and listening to the interviews so that way I can apply it to my life. And I need to do more of that. I need to personalize the podcast a little bit more. And that's what I got from this interview. And that's what I'm going to start doing more of. And in this week's moment of gratitude, I want to say thank you to a member of Superior Nation. His name is Joe Norman, and he posted a Facebook post giving a shout out to the show, in which he said, last Saturday morning around 6 a.m., I was halfway through a 90-minute trip when my car started overheating. At the time, I had a podcast playing called Your Superior Self, hosted by Perry Hall's own Trey Downs. And when I pulled over to let the car cool off, I really started paying attention. The interview was with Michael O'Brien discussing an accident he had and how While he was recovering, he decided he would never have a bad day again. Instead of dwelling on the challenges he was facing, Michael started focusing on being thankful for them and the opportunities they provide him. After the car cooled off, I drove to a gas station to buy some coolant and kept listening. While I was waiting, I thought about what Michael and Trey were talking about. Was this really a bad start to my day, or was it an opportunity to have a donut with my son Clark while we waited for the car to cool down a second time? Should I be mad at myself for ignoring the fact that the engine had been working extra hard the past few days? Or should I be thankful that I was in a situation where I could teach Clark a little bit about how engines work and why it's important to check your fluids before leaving on a trip? I'm glad I focused on being thankful because it really helped me get my day back on track. Thank you, Trey and Michael, for the mindset shift. This one little trick will have a huge positive influence on my life going forward. Wow, that is such a great story. That is such a heartwarming story. I want to say thank you to Joe Norman for sharing that. And if you guys have stories that are similar to Joe's, please share it. I would love to read it on the podcast. It really solidifies the idea behind what I'm trying to do, and it makes me feel good that an interview that I had with a awesome dude, Michael O'Brien, really helped someone change their attitude on a particular day that the events weren't going in his favor. So that is such a great story. Thank you, Joe, for sharing. If you want to check out the original post, head over to Facebook and check out Your Superior Self group, or you can check me out at Trey Downs, and the post is in there. You can also follow me on Instagram at tdowns80 and on Twitter at DownsTrey. And to get back into interview mode, I want to talk about our guest, very special guest. Her name is Pamela Slim. She's an author, community builder, consultant, and former corporate director of training and development at Barclays Global Investors. She focused her first decade in business on creating and delivering training programs for large companies such as HP, Charles Schwab, 3Com, Chevron, and wait for it, Cisco Systems. Pam is best known for her book, Escape from Cubicle Nation, named Best Small Business and Entrepreneur Book of 2009. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to bring to you Pamela Slim. Hey, what's up, Superior Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Your Superior Self. Tonight, I am joined with author and entrepreneur Pamela Slim. Pamela, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here.
So for my listeners who haven't heard of you yet, I'm really excited to have you on the show. Can you just tell them a little bit about yourself and what you're up to today?
Definitely. So I have like a long and sordid past. It depends on how long we have to talk about it, but I've done a lot of different things. Kind of started in community development in Latin America, actually, and then began to realize that I had passion for doing work within my own community, not really knowing what like a 19-year-old college student could add value, being in Bogota, Colombia, trying to tell them, what to do. And then that path led me through corporate for a lot of years, which I actually really liked. I loved my cubicle. I was not anti-cubicle. And then in 1996, I quit my job to start consulting, always on the human side of business, working in a lot of tech companies in the Bay Area where I'm from. And I did that for about 10 years. And then through doing that, I was talking to a lot of people who, some of them were my clients, who were really curious about how I quit my job to start a business. And so that sort of planted the seed for me to start my blog, which I did in 2005, which was called Escape from Cubicle Nation. And that grew, and it grew into my first book, which was Escape from Cubicle Nation. And then I spent about 12 years doing early stage entrepreneurship, helping people to launch and grow businesses. And then a couple of years ago, in 2016, I opened up the Main Street Learning Lab here in Mesa, Arizona, where I live. And this is where we do a lot of, again, early stage entrepreneurship, but a little bit more with the economic development background. And just kind of what's been germane as well to my kind of my work life is I did martial arts for a long time. So when I was in San Francisco, I was a volunteer executive director for a nonprofit capoeira group. It's an Afro-Brazilian martial art. So that was like a huge passion. I did MMA when I came here to Arizona. So I've always kind of enjoyed that juxtaposition of, corporate business life and martial arts and community. It's kind of been the big mix.
That's so awesome. Like MMA, that's awesome. Like to look at a little bit of your like resume, I would never guess that you did like MMA fighting at all.
That's what I like. I like that it doesn't.
Oh,
That people don't expect like a suburban white mom to have a black belt in MMA.
that is crazy. Like, let me read my book. If you don't, I'll choke you out.
Exactly, it comes in handy.
That's awesome. So in 2005, that's interesting. You were writing a blog. Like that wasn't very popular back then, was it?
I call it the dog years of the internet because, yeah, I feel like one of the elders, the elder statespeople. It was a different time. People were definitely writing blogs, so I really became aware of it. Actually, I took a class on online marketing where all of it, I called it Narnia. If you've ever read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? It was like this whole mystery to me that you could really be connecting with people over the internet. But one of the assignments was to create a blog. And so I actually spent quite a bit of time. I did like a 6-month class, and I really thought a lot about who I wanted to work with and what I wanted to write. And it ended up being just really interesting timing because it was in the early stages, and I was able to connect with some really amazing people like Seth Godin and Guy Kawasaki and some of the folks who really early on were doing work on the web, inspiring entrepreneurs. And it's just been a total blast of a journey. Now it's funny, in 2018, I look and there's so many people that are doing, we didn't have podcasts, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have all these things back then. And there are a lot of people talking about doing it, but it makes me feel proud to know I was one of the early kind of people who inspired, I think, people to start doing that.
Early pioneer in the world of blogging. Like, talk about that though. Like, was that something that you were comfortable with? Like, talking about your experiences on the blog? Like, tell me what that looked like for you creating that?
Yeah, it was really fun. It was actually interesting the way that our own career path is. I'm sure for a lot of your listeners, you can have the same experience where I never would have believed you if you would have said that I would add writer to part of what I do. I've always loved English. I love the subject. I love to read. Grew up in the library, always reading a lot of books. But when I started blogging, what was interesting is although I've always really loved my work, that's been one gift, is that I've never been disgruntled. No matter what kind of work I've done, it brings me great joy. But I noticed something in a corporate environment that I always imagined like there was a bubble over people's head, like you'd see in a cartoon where we're all going through the day and people are being, fine to each other and civil sitting around a meeting. But the bubble over everybody's head is like, I want to strangle everybody and get me out of here and I want to quit. And so when I started the blog, I felt like I could actually be saying what was in the bubble in people's head. But from a perspective of being useful, because I am not at all the person who will say, jump ship, do whatever you want, do what you love, the money will follow. That is not true. As somebody who's been a coach for many decades, you need to work hard, you need to be thoughtful, you need to, test and try before you leap. And so it was really great to have a vehicle through which I could really be sharing. I shared a little bit of my journey, but honestly, like I quit with no plan. I turned 30, I had been working really hard. I've been doing tons of capoeira, the Afro-Brazilian martial art. I was exhausted. I got pneumonia and I just quit with no plan at all. And I have a huge tolerance for risk. And so things worked out for me, right? But that's not necessarily the advice that I would give to other people. So that's why it was really good to begin to tell stories of other people and really to lay the path. I don't know if you've seen like in any Indiana Jones movie or something, there's always like either a rock or some bad guy is like chasing the hero to the edge of a cliff and magically some bridge comes across, right, to the other side. And that's kind of the metaphor of the way that I look at the work that I did. It's like helping people to cross that bridge from corporate into a viable business to start. And then from there is where often then, right, they worked with other people or they did other stuff to grow.
So you're like that bridge that shows up at the cliff, right?
That's right.
So was there an instance in your corporate life that made you want to quit? Was it the blog picking up and opportunities picking up for you as well? Or was it like a situation that you were like, I'm done with this?
No, I mean, when I quit my corporate job, it was 1996. So there were no blogs then. I had gotten pneumonia, and we'd had a merger happen with a company. So it just wasn't quite the same place that I had really loved before. So I was ready for a change. But there wasn't any one moment that I could really remember. I just had that feeling of, it's really time for a change. And that's what got me started. So the first 10 years of my business, it was really a referral-based business totally, right? I network with people, I begin to do training and development consulting. And for 10 years, I had a very healthy, very viable business. And it wasn't until 2005 that I began to really do things on the internet.
Like, what's an example of someone making that transition? Let's say they want to leave their corporate job. What's one way they can start working on now to help them make that transition? Besides test and trial.
Well, it is test and try. There's in setting up a really viable side hustle, when you think there's like very specific things that you need to do in order to get yourself and your business ready for prime time. So there's all the nuts and bolts things where you get a, business license and business account and legal paperwork and all that kind of stuff, just so that you're able to legally do business and have a good structure. And then there is really identifying what your business idea is and setting up the structure so that you can see if you can sell it. Like, I've seen the greatest business ideas in the history of the world. Some which went forth with great aplomb and some that totally flopped because you just don't know. Like, you don't know if something is viable until you try it. And your neighbor might have the same idea and you feel like you're doing the same things and they could have raging success and you could fail, or vice versa, right? So it's like very unique. What I believe in is actual testing in the real world. When you get somebody who's not related to you to give you money for your product or service. So that's the way that you do begin to build your side hustle business. Let's say you want to, do voiceover work because you have a really great voice. So you would try it, you'd put up a page saying you can do it, you'd create some samples, you'd start to pitch places that might hire voiceover talent, or you'd go to Fiverr or something, right? And set up your profile there so that you could be seeing if people were willing to pay you for it so you could build your portfolio. Or, whatever it is, you build some kind of a product, a cool motorcycle or something, and you would need to build it. To build it, you would need to see if you could sell it to somebody and begin to really develop the business that way.
I want to say thank you about the voiceover compliment. I feel like that was directed towards me.
I may have thought about you when saying that, but it was like hypothetically, right?
So let's talk about that, like testing. Some people don't know where to go to test their product. I know what you're doing with the, I don't want to say incubator. Maybe that's an incubator, more or less. Like, I'm thinking of the same thing as far as creating a co-working space. That's my idea. That's my vision. That's where I want to go. You have the Main Street Learning Lab in Arizona. You started that. What was a type of research that you did for that? Did you get the data? Did you look at all the, did you Google something? Did you see where all the businesses were? How did you research that business?
No, that really came from, I did a 25 city tour in 2015 where I was teaching community building skills to entrepreneurs around the country. And it was early stage research. My next book that I'm writing is about communities and ecosystems in a way that you can think about marketing that's not just building an individual empire, right? Where you're the center and you're the expert, but rather that you see yourself in this bigger ecosystem. Like, you and I are in the ecosystem, right? Of helping people to create viable businesses. And you have an angle of blue collar, right? I have a background in corporate and, service professionals. And so based on who it is that we want to help, we need a whole bunch of us who are out there, right? That are doing that work. So that was really the premise, is for me to go out around the country, and I called it the Unbook Tour. If you know Scott Stratton, who wrote Unmarketing, I kind of tease him about that, right? That I did the book tour before writing the book to test and try some of the ideas and the models to see what it is that resonated most with people. And it really was through that experience of meeting people all across the country in different cities and going to different spaces that, I had been, again, in San Francisco, when I did the Capoeira work in the community, I was, always in the streets talking to kids and very much engaged in the live community. And then I had spent like 10 or 11 years just really doing stuff on the internet because my kids were little and, I hadn't had that real community connection. And so in visiting many different places around the country is really where I got excited to see what people were doing locally and see how much more integrated you could be with working with government and nonprofit and startup and just doing things that had a bigger impact. So I was inspired by the idea and then per my earlier comment of how I make decisions, had no analysis. I walked down Main Street. I was working with somebody to try to look at different spaces, but I saw our space. I knew right away that it was a space that we wanted, and it is the base for my company, right? So what I say is it's a learning laboratory, and so during the day it's my office where I do work and where clients fly in to do work with me. And then in the evenings and on the weekends is where we have all kinds of community collaborative events. So it is not a co-working space. I don't have like a membership to be here. It's really a space that my husband and I have decided that we want to be offering for the community so that people do have a place to be testing ideas, like you said, right? People try a new workshop to get feedback, or they, will try to sell a certain product or do things like that. So that's really what it is that we wanted to create. And, we knew in looking at the financial analysis, I had an outside office before, so it was about twice the amount that we were doing before, but I still knew that we could comfortably do it without creating a whole big structure around it, right? And to me, what was really important is the whole process that I went through in coming here to downtown. Like, some people knew me on the internet and knew me because of my books, but in my hometown of downtown Mesa, nobody had any idea who I was at all. So it was like a chance to really put to practice what I had been teaching about community building, to test myself, to see if I really had it, because that's always my test. I'm never going to write about something I haven't done. And it's been amazing. In 2 years, I know everybody, they know me. We're doing amazing work. It's really been a powerful exercise.
That's great. That's very interesting. Real quick, a little plug here for a book that I've been reading, the Lean Startup, and it talks a lot about what you're speaking to as far as doing the research before you launch something. It's by Eric Ries. I'm probably not pronouncing his name.
It's Ries. Yeah, Eric Ries. It's a great book. It's a classic book. Yeah, Lean Startup methodology is a really great thing for entrepreneurs to know about. Eric's a cool guy.
Yeah, I love it. I got it on Audible, and I have the paperback as well. It's really good, and it speaks to your point about research and how important that is. But going back to your community building, like what is a really good, effective way of building a community?
Well, the first thing, there's a whole kind of series of steps that you do. And first is just thinking about, who are you and what kind of community do you want to build? So it depends on what your objective is, right? For me and my husband here in Mesa, it was definitely connecting with entrepreneurs, and it was connecting with more underrepresented entrepreneurs. My husband is Navajo, and he actually had a heavy equipment construction business for a long time, for many decades. And one of the data points that we had gathered is when I went around the country and was talking to people about if they had ever seen like a Native American entrepreneur as a business presenter presenting at a conference, like as an expert in 23 cities around the US, only 7 people had ever seen that. And I knew from going to all my husband's conferences that there are like hundreds and thousands of really amazing Native American entrepreneurs, right? But I was like, what is the deal? Like, why does nobody have any idea what's happening within that particular sector? So that was like one of the areas of interest for us, where we definitely wanted to be connecting with people so we could begin to build those bridges, right? From an economic development perspective, make sure that there were connections happening in different communities for all the economic opportunity that's happening here, downtown. So that's just one thing, right? When you're thinking about opening your space down the road, knowing you have a focus on blue collar, right? You would think, okay, I want to be connecting with people, with companies, with organizations, associations that already have many members that really fit my ideal profile. I call it a watering hole, right? So there's a place in person or online where you can't walk 2 feet without bumping into somebody who would be ideal for you. Right? So contractors conferences, or, you know what I mean? Like associations of people who are in the trades, the kinds of conferences I went to with my husband, when he did construction, those would be places that would be perfect for you to be building your community quickly. And a lot of times we think about it, when we say community, we're not really talking about community. Like, we want people who are fans and who are going to be customers. Like, that's a clarification I often make in business. Nothing wrong with fans and customers. Like, we want that, right? We need to eat. We want to have a healthy business. But when you start to talk about community building, the difference is that when you're in community with somebody, you they come to you because that you have something that's really valuable to them, but then you go to them because they have something that's also really valuable to you, right? It's really two-way, and it's, reciprocal. And sometimes there's a direct benefit that you get by being in partnership with people to your bottom line, to your business. And other times you do things just because you're a really good neighbor, right? And you want to be helping somebody out. There's my couple neighbors. I actually coach their daughter, who is a tech startup founder that has her office in their building, but they're a couple doors down. They're a clothing store, and the dad, Chris, every morning, unasked, just because he's a nice guy, always like sweeps in front of my store, right? I mean, I don't pay him anything. There's no direct benefit, but that's just kind of the thing that he does because he has that consciousness of just wanting to be a good neighbor, right? Like those are the kinds of things in community that then you realize down the road when we are looking out for each other that way and taking care of each other, we look for ways to add benefit, when they have office space for rent above their building. So of course, now that we have a relationship, my friend who has a virtual reality startup was looking for a space. I'm like, oh, go talk to Chris and Michelle, right? Because we had that kind of connection. So for some people I know, it's not like as immediate. And you and I know from being on the internet and looking at a lot of startup stuff, it's all about like speed and clicks and leads and getting people as quickly as possible. Personally, I don't see the world that way. I see the world as, human beings that are on a journey. We want to be taking care of each other. We want to be building relationships. And yes, we want to be efficient, right? We don't have all the time in the world to do it. But remember, when you have like people on your list or people who are interested in your business, those are hardworking people that work hard for their money, right? You want them to make a good investment in working with you. And if you do your job right, you're going to have a long-term relationship with them where you have mutual respect. Those are the kind of customers I would rather have.
Just some of the, like you mentioned that you coach now, you've been coaching for a long time. Like, why doesn't the traditional career advice apply anymore?
The traditional career advice, I think, within the world that probably our grandparents lived in, and in some cases our parents, is that you get with a good company and you stick with it. You do a good job. You're hardworking. You're loyal to the company, and you do well by them. They do well by you, right? You continue to progress and you have stability. We know that simply doesn't exist today, right? There's much less stability. Companies are changing, merging with others, laying off people. There's so much more economic instability. And so to me, for some people, they are more wired to be the kind of person who likes to be in a singular career. And there's nothing wrong with that. My dad was a photographer. And he worked for Pacific Gas and Electric, the California utility company, for most of his career as a corporate photographer. He loved his job. Like, he just totally loved what he did. He took a little stint working at an oil refinery for, I think it was maybe 7 years or something after my parents divorced, just to kind of like do what one needs to do, right? Going through that situation. But for my dad, he had that very clear path of loving to be a photographer, and he happened to work for a company that valued him. He actually was, he retired, and he was laid off a month after he was retired at 65. But from 65 to 81 until he got sick, they hired him as a freelancer, right? He was so valuable. I would always say, like, Dad, aren't there any like 25-year-old photographers in San Francisco, that they could hire? But he had really, established himself that way. So for some people, they prefer that path. And if you can make that stick, that's great. For others, they prefer that path, and world does not end up working out that way, right? And that's where, for me, sometimes, because of what I know, because of being in this whole like internet world where I see people doing all kinds of different things in different ways. My clients are all over the world. Because I coach people, we can do it over Skype or over Zoom or something. So I'm not bound by geography, but I might see a story of like, oh my gosh, in this small town, this, maybe a business closed or a factory shut down or something like that, right? You have these amazing, hardworking people who are really talented, who are just feel stuck and left because there's no opportunity. And what breaks my heart when I see that, which is I'm sure part of what motivates you, is that often they have no idea that there are many other ways that they could begin to work looking differently at the market. So it either could be doing things, starting things in their own town, small startups where they could be working, with other companies, or they could begin to explore different types of ideas and different career paths that might be different from the way that they grew up doing, what it is that they were trained to do in the trades. And to me, that's the thing that's so important is the world just is not stable anymore. So if we're trying to hold on desperately and like wish it were, I don't really see that as being a strategy. Again, if you prefer that and you do everything you can to stick with a good company, I think that's fantastic. All work is honorable, and there is nothing glamorous or sexy about working for yourself at all. At all. Like people try to make it that way, but it's hard work either way you look at it. You have to choose the work mode that really makes sense for you.
All work is honorable. I love that. And the old saying goes, the entrepreneur is willing to work 80 hours so he doesn't have to work 40 hours for someone else. As somebody who chooses that life because they can't work in the corporate world. And you were talking about your father loving, the company loving him and his value. Do you think that's why so many people are out there trying to do their own thing, is because companies nowadays don't value their employees?
I think that's part of it. I think there's a lot of factors that really feed into it. For some people, it's meaning in their work. So they may have just fallen into a pattern where, their parents told them to choose a certain career and it sounded good. And so they did it and they fell into it, right? Some people are like that. And then they kind of wake up one day and say, I hate accounting. Like, why am I accounting? I never really liked this. And they're looking for meaning in their work. For others, they don't like the rigidity of the structure, so that, they want to have more flexibility to be with their family, right? You and I were just talking before your daughter came in, I'm used to that. I can be here working. My kids can come in if I, need to go to a school performance or something, right? I can jump in the car and do it. And for a lot of people, that's really worth a lot. For others, it's control over destiny. It's not working at the whim of whoever happens to be your supervisor or your manager, who can have a lot of influence about your, momentum in your career. And for other people, it's money. They see a limit to how much money they could make as an employee, and they're really looking to grow. And so I think it just depends on the person.
So tell us about your book, Body of Work, and where did that come from?
Well, Body of Work came from really doing so much work in early stage startup, where after a while, I noticed that many people did have this view that you're only cool and creative if you work for yourself. And I just felt it was absolutely disrespectful to people in trades, people in academia, people who love their job in the government. Like there's people in nonprofits, school teachers, police officers, there's nothing glamorous about a work mode. And I wanted to be able to look at a framework because we couldn't look at those traditional career paths. It's like there's advice for people that are in corporate careers or careers as an employee, and there's advice for people as entrepreneurs. But to me, I wanted to create a framework that would work no matter where you worked. So the idea of body of work is that your body of work is everything you create, you contribute, you affect, and you impact throughout the course of your life. So it includes tangible things like what you build, or, if you write a book or you make music or something like that. But it also includes your family, the way you are in community, right? The kind of person that you are, the legacy that you bring to your life. So much like it's easy for us to look at artists or musicians in going through different stages, right? And having different bodies of work, that's really where the term comes from. If we look at it that way for ourselves, I feel like it can open up more possibilities. So you don't feel so much like, oh my gosh, like I'm totally veering off because I spent 7 years of my life being an electrician, and then all of a sudden I'm doing voiceover, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. It begins to make sense when you look at it from a body of work, right? You're proud about what it is that you created. You contributed to the growth and development of like well-functioning electrical systems, within your community. And then you are ready to do something different, and you begin to build the part of your body of work that was about voiceover, right? That is a way that you can look at career transition. To me, that is much more interesting. It opens up new possibilities, and then if you decide after your, side hustle voiceover that you want to go back and get a job working in a local nonprofit, that's totally fine, right? Because there's nothing magical about what mode of work you are in, right? Freelancer, employee, whatever. It's really about what it is that you're creating, and are you proud of what you're creating? And is it adding the kind of value to the world that is important to you?
I think the body of work analogy is so key because I think it allows us to really understand what we're going through. Like I think a lot of us hit that plateau of, what are we, I get to a certain point where I'm like, yeah, I'm the best at whatever. I'm the best at being the best electrician. And now it's kind of like, now that I've gotten to this goal, now I'm just on cruise control going through life, like, blah. And so I might want to try different, something else, something that kind of, inspires me or fulfills me. And that's a great way to look at it, because your body of work, you're through with it as an electrician, but that might not be the case for something else. And then that's where you jump over to that.
That's exactly right. Because, you sometimes can have our profession as like the noun descriptor of what we are. Right? Like, I am an electrician, or I am a writer, or I am a professor. And so when you lose that, especially if you lose it where it wasn't really your choice, then that's where people go through massive identity shifts, right? As opposed to, I'm Pam Slim, and right in this case, I'm a corporate training and development manager in downtown San Francisco, or I'm a martial artist, competing to get my black belt in MMA, for this part. And like, those are all part of elements of my personality and my body of work. But when you begin to look at the threads and the themes that go through that, to me, what's always been super exciting is transformation, right? Pushing limits, transformation.
It seems like you're just this person that goes after whatever scares the crap out of you. Like, whatever barrier I can knock down next, I'm going after it. I mean, you go from your corporate life to being a coach to MMA to the learning lab. Like, is that accurate?
I'm not scared of it. I run towards things that sound super exciting. And I have a high tolerance for risk. It's not that I'm not scared of anything. Of course I am. But I'm not scared of that. I'm not scared of growth. And we all have our things, right? I feel like I see sometimes, it's hard to explain, but like, I kind of see what's happening in the future. Like, I can see what needs to be built. Like, for example, in here, right, in downtown Mesa, we're right here on Main Street. I call it like we're the cousin at Thanksgiving that is an adult, but everybody still puts them at the kids' table, right? Like, kind of, we don't get any respect. Everybody in Phoenix is cool, and, Scottsdale are the rich, fancy people. So Mesa's kind of been, not looked at as well, slower economy, et cetera. And part of what I see when I walk down the street is like, I see the possibility, like my head works where I just begin to see the threads that are coming together, where there is development happening. We have Arizona State University now that's coming here. We're creating an innovation district. And so when I'm looking ahead, I'm like, ooh, we need to be building these bridges. If we want our whole community to benefit from this economic development, we need to start to build relationships. We need to look at building leadership skills and capacity. We need to be building relationships with the developers who are opening, so we can influence their vision of like what kinds of businesses we want to have downtown. And so for me, when I begin to see that vision, that's the thing that I just can't not do, right? I'm just drawn to it and begin to do it. And then, the challenging part is in the journey of making it all happen, right? It's not easy being a mom and being a business owner and making all this stuff happen, but it's super compelling.
Weren't you scared at any point of failing, like failure? Like, I think that's what a lot that holds us back, is that fear of that, why start doing MMA? I don't know if I'll make it all the way through, or why start a startup because I'm scared to death that I'll fail and I'll ruin my credit, or I'll ruin people with the way that people perceive me as a person or my reputation. At what point did you just say, I'm not scared of failing, I'm just going to do it?
It doesn't scare me. I mean, maybe it's blissful ignorance, or right, I might have like a huge blind side, or somehow I missed that, I missed that gene, but it doesn't bother me. Like I think it's also a muscle that is built. It speaks to a lot of what it is, the work that you're doing, what you're trying to help people do, is like, It is scary. If I had always grown up like in a certain way where I never took any risks, I never did anything different, then it would feel scarier. And I think if my parents were the type of parents who would tell me, like, stay in your job, be stable and predictable. My parents were not like that. My parents were very encouraging. And like in high school, I decided to be an exchange student. So I lived abroad for a year in Switzerland. And I feel like when I was 16, that was like my senior year of high school. And then that led to wanting to live abroad. I lived in Mexico and Colombia and Brazil, where I trained capoeira. And I think doing that, like the more that you do that, the more you get in that experience of just like challenging yourself to do different things, you get more confidence. So remember, like when I opened up in 2016, I had been in business for 20 years already, right? Like I knew that I was able to make things happen. I have a realistic view of what my skills are, and I knew that I could support it with my current business, and I had confidence that I am a good community builder. And so we could begin to develop some really cool things. And I'm excited by learning new things and by being a bit of a pioneer. So I just, the part that's important to me in telling my story is not to say, oh my God, like I'm just so great and you should be like me, because we all have our own journey, right? We all have our stuff. And I haven't happened to have my own fear or doubt around my career. That's always been my ace. That's been my strength. And so for you, a listener, or you, if you do feel that, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you, right? It's a normal feeling. Your fear is the thing that's going to protect you from doing something totally foolish. I have seen a lot in all the years that I've worked with people, and you can really harm yourself financially. It can be a stress on relationships. It can be really stressful for families, right? So if you're trying something that's totally new, you want to be thoughtful about how it is that you approach it. But the part, and which is why I'm such a fan of really taking small steps, right? Incrementally, and then challenging yourself in different ways to do some weird stuff like I've done, right? Like do something totally different, drive home a different way. Like if you're totally into doing, weightlifting, like take a dance class one day just so you feel totally out of your comfort zone. And by doing that, you begin to build like emotional capacity, almost spiritual capacity for just walking through a difficult area. And what that does is that opens you up from a developmental perspective to be more flexible and to learn things more quickly.
That is so accurate. I never even thought about that. Like me starting the podcast was definitely like the analogy, if you're a weightlifter, go do a dance class. Like I was always just very quiet. I didn't really like speaking in front of other people or really talking, because it was like my weakness. It was just like, I don't know, I just very shy. And it has definitely put me in a position to, one, grow as a person, and two, puts me in a lot of uncomfortable positions where I have to ask people questions and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, that analogy is so right on, because you put yourself in this uncomfortable position, and the more times you do it, the stronger you get spiritually, or you grow as a person. It's like the video game analogy that Tony Robbins says. He's like, why does the 7-year-old always whip your butt in a game? Is because he's been there before. Like, you keep putting yourself in those situations, you're going to learn and grow and adapt to that feeling. And each time you're going to grow as a person and get stronger.
That is so true. And then, you look at it, I mean, listen to your voice. Like you have a great voice. So even though you're not just randomly doing something where you can't have any chance of success, right? Like you started with something where you really do have some strengths and gifts, even though the things around it can feel super uncomfortable. I just gave a talk the last week at the American Indian Chamber of Commerce. It was like their award ceremony, and my husband had actually won in 2010 for Entrepreneur of the Year. And I told the story there of when he had been like a subcontractor for a long time. He did heavy equipment grading, excavation and grading. So it was mainly just working, for general contractors, and he didn't really have to do any selling, but he went through a stage of wanting to grow his business. So he had to get into sales, and it was just super uncomfortable for him. He was raised on the Navajo Nation. He spoke Navajo till he was like 12, so English was a second language. It was just like so much stuff about it was really uncomfortable for him. And so one day I called him up. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, "What are you doing, honey?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm sitting in my truck. I'm going to go introduce myself like to this big boss, guy who had a big construction company." And then I went about my day, and I called him back, like 10:30 or something. I'm like, "What, how'd it go?" And he's like, I'm still in my truck." Like he literally sat there for 2 hours, like shaking because it was so scary for him to do it. But he did it. He finally like crossed the doorway and went and introduced himself. And then he ended up over months and then over a couple of years being really comfortable doing business development for big development deals here in Phoenix. He helped build the Diamondbacks stadium and did a whole bunch of freeway projects and all those things. Like there's no way that you're going to build the confidence and the competence if you don't take that first step. And like people are like, "Oh, but maybe I'll take another online class, or I'll, go to another Tony Robbins seminar, or read another book, or listen to another podcast." And you're like, "Nope, it's not going to be easier. It's only you have to take action. Action is everything."
Mm-hmm. I always say if you want to get a six pack, you can't read a book about it. Like you have to take the actions. You have to do a sit up. So it's kind of like the action is where you're going to get the experience. It's where you're going to get the reps, and you have to put the disciplines in place to make you do those reps every day. Like emotion alone is not going to drive you or inspire you. Like, yeah, one day you might be up here and feeling great and want to do the sit-ups or whatever, the research on the company that you want to start up. And then the next day you're down here with this attitude of who am I? So it's like you got to get these disciplines in place every day to kind of put you in your make you uncomfortable, and do them every day and keep them and keep a promise to yourself that you're going to do them. That way you can grow up.
It's totally true. I know. Well, it's funny because sometimes, whatever, and then you have to keep it up, because when you look at the consistency, it was funny the other day, my son's really into boxing right now. He does soccer and boxing. And so he's up at like 4:30 in the morning. He's 13, him and his best friend, like they go running early in the morning and they're all into fitness. And he was like, "Hey mom, when you used to have abs, like what were they like?" And I was like, "Oh, the pain and suffering." But it was so right. Like when I used to have the total six pack, it's because I did the same thing as he was doing, right? I was working out probably like 5 hours a day. I don't do that right now. So when you're not doing it, it's not like you do it once and all of a sudden you have the endless results, right? You have to be doing it consistently to keep it up and not get lazy about it.
Yeah, you gotta, if you do something small every day, you eventually will get results. It's like, who was it? Jim Rohn or somebody was like, said that if you, I'm totally messing this up, but if you did something every day for like a half hour, eventually you'll be the master at that, whatever that may be. And not just in your area, but in the world, because the people that dedicate that much time to a certain thing, like you're going to put in the reps, you're going to get the results, and nobody else is going to do that. Like you have to outwork these guys. Like if you want to be the best wrestler, you have to go put in the work every day. Like you have to do things that people don't want to do, but it's staying consistent and doing the same things. And then eventually, hopefully you'll reach your goal. The best writer, like you can't just go write a book and expect to be a New York Times bestselling author. You can't write a book, your book, like you couldn't just write Escape from the Cubicle Nation without putting in the reps first, without doing the blog and getting comfortable and putting yourself out there. Like you have to do little steps every day to get a big goal.
I think that's true. And I mean, the one thing I will say, and I think it's true for every one of us, is having some natural strengths and having gifts is a piece of it too, right? That like, if I decided that I wanted to be the world's greatest basketball player, like there's certain things that I probably wouldn't necessarily be cut out for that. I could end up being super good, but you look at for the choice that you make about where you put your energy and attention, there is that dedication to doing things. And then when you look at really getting in a place, I care less about like being the greatest in the world, because I swear to God, there's always somebody cuter, smarter, richer. You know what I mean? Like as soon as you think you own a space, like some whippersnapper comes up, right? And is like better than you. So to me, it's about greatness, creating great things, making great change, doing something that's meaningful, and where you are directing your energies in a way that's really leveraging your strength. And you're exactly right. It will not ever happen without that dedication to really practicing it. But then to put yourself in a good place, like looking at this grain you had, right, of like you have a really strong voice, and then the things that you're practicing overall and doing your podcast is to do all the things around it to be bringing that gift out.
I think it's funny because my buddy who has come on the podcast with me before, he's like, I'm never going to be the greatest basketball player. I'm like 5'6", 5'5". I'm like, well, you're never going to dunk, but you can always bring a trampoline out there. And it's this, you might not be the best at it, but there are workarounds, right? Like there's definitely, that's how you got to look at being an entrepreneur. Like you might not be the best entrepreneur, the $1 million company, but there are ways and things that you can do to work around it to get the best of you. Right. So to be the best version of yourself. And that's why I created this podcast, was because I'm not going to be the best interviewer. I'm not going to be the best podcaster. It's all geared towards being the best versions of ourselves. Like this is producing the best version of me. So it's like, that's exactly right. Like you're not going to be an NBA superstar, but you might be a pretty darn good basketball player, and you might be the best version of that basketball player for yourself.
That's right. Exactly right.
At the very end of my show, I have kind of give my audience a little bit of a pep talk, a little bit of an inspirational motivating speech. So just imagine, Pam, that I am that blue collar guy who's thinking about maybe leaving my workplace, wherever I work, whether it be corporate or one of the trades. And I'm kind of feeling that fear. Like I really don't know what to do next. What would your advice be to them?
My piece of advice would be to look around your circle and begin to get really deliberate about how it is that you can begin to widen your circle to include people who are doing things that are in maybe living in a way that's very different than what it is that you're used to. Because one of the main things that can keep people stuck in a place and not aware of opportunities is in that comfort, understandable comfort of being with your friends, right? Being with your buddies. And we've all been in situations, myself included. I've been sometimes that whiner who is like, man, why doesn't this work? And don't they know how hard I work? And why isn't this happening, right? You can be in these self-reinforcing groups where everybody that you know is in the same situation, and you're going to miss the opportunity for something totally different. So maybe your brother-in-law, like, works for himself, or maybe there's a neighbor that's doing something different. Or my favorite always, because I spend so much time in like soccer fields and in sports situations with my kids, is talk to somebody who might be like a parent on the sports field and ask them what it is that they do. And you might meet somebody who's doing something totally different, where you can begin to expose yourself to other ways of being. Because the thing that keeps us stuck is we're afraid of losing our identity, right? We're afraid of losing our community. We're afraid of living in a van down by the river because we're financially devastated. And those are good things to be worried about. Nobody wants you to be, right, like in a situation where you feel totally alone and exiled from those you love. But it's going to be a little bit dangerous if you're trying to do these things we've talked about this whole podcast, to grow, to expand, to open your mind to new possibilities, if you're always running in those same circles. And then when you get in conversations with people, try to just be open, try to really listen. And even maybe in your head, if something might pop up where you immediately want to disagree or something, just say, tell me more about that. Like, what do you mean by that? Right? And dig more and just try to listen a lot to begin to get different ideas. And then once you do that, then you can start to go down that path of being a little bit structured to figure out what could be something that would be interesting for me. You know, we're all capable of doing so many different kinds of things. And I've seen my husband the last couple of years, he kind of retired from heavy equipment construction, and he went back to one of his great passions, which is being raised like as a more of a wellness, like a traditional healer, you know, and like he loves that work and it's part of his culture. And it's totally different from what he did waking up at 3:00 in the morning every day, right? And he was great at what he did. He was a magician out there, you know, in job sites, and he's so proud of what he did. But he has been able to open up a whole new part of himself that makes him now at age 53 such a happy person, and that's really a joy as his wife. And it's something I wish for everybody.
I love it. Thank you so much. Pamela Slim, she is the author of Body of Work and Escape from Cubicle Nation. Pam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to say thank you to Pamela for coming on the show. That wraps it up for another episode of Your Superior Self. I want to say thank you to you, the listener. Thank you for taking the time to download this episode, and please leave a rating and a review wherever you get your podcast from. If this is the first time that you're listening to the podcast, please hit the subscribe button and make sure to sign up for our email list at yoursuperiorself.com. All right, guys, have a great week, and I will talk to you guys later.